Get them out of the water. Ethan's voice shattered the backyard as the twins screamed, and Brielle froze like she'd just been caught doing something unforgivable. The crash of shouting hadn't come from anger alone. It came from memory. Ethan Rowland had once lost everything to water. Years earlier, during a quiet house party by the pool, music had drowned out the only scream that mattered. His wife stepped outside with one crying baby. A slip, a sharp crack of bone on tile, and then the kind of silence that never truly leaves a man. By the time anyone noticed, the pool lights were glowing over still water. One twin survived. His wife did not. Since that night, Ethan learned to fear what he could not control, especially water, especially near his children. He buried the house in rules, cameras, schedules, protocols. No risks, no exceptions. Love felt safer when it looked like control. The only person who never followed his rigidity was Brielle Monroe. She sang when the twins cried. She held them when the monitors said they were fine. And when strange rashes crept across Liam and Noah's skin in the heat of summer, she did something Ethan never would. She trusted instinct before instruction. Late one afternoon, while the ocean wind carried salt through open glass doors, Brielle guided the twins into the shallow backyard splash pool and cooled their burning skin with gentle sprays of water. The boys laughed for the first time in days. Across town, Ethan returned early without warning. He walked through the glass doors and saw water, his sons, and a woman he trusted standing between them. And the past came rushing back. For a second, it felt like time folded in on itself. The same water, the same terror, the same helpless fear he thought he'd buried with his wife. "Get them out of the water," he shouted, and the present collapsed into chaos. Brielle turned in shock. The twins cried. Security moved. Ethan didn't see a caregiver in that moment. He saw the night that killed his wife, and in the next few seconds, Ethan Rowland would make a decision driven by grief, not truth. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's dive back into the story. The hum of the tires on the coastal highway had done little to settle Ethan's nerves. He hadn't planned to come back early from San Jose, if anything. He had welcomed the distance, but something restless had stirred in him. Something unseen, whispering in his gut. He needed to be home. He pulled up quietly, the electric car making no noise as he parked near the guest driveway. It was nearly twilight, and the breeze from the ocean carried the scent of salt and pine. From the side gate, he entered the backyard, stepping through the familiar white stones that led toward the pool area. The house stood in dignified silence behind him, but what he saw in the backyard made his heart stop mid-beat. Through the open glass doors, Ethan saw them. Liam, Noah, the twins stood in a kiddie pool, drenched, giggling uncontrollably, tiny bodies quivering from laughter, not cold. Water sprayed from a green garden hose held playfully by Brielle, their young maid. She was beaming her joy, effortless, honest. But Ethan didn't see that. He saw then, a sudden roaring in his ears. That song playing from years ago, he couldn't name it, but the melody crawled back up his spine like a ghost. A summer tune. Bright, happy, ordinary. Then came the scream. Her scream, the one that had never left him, the one that had echoed across this very backyard, bouncing off the pool tiles, splitting the air like a siren. Then came the silence. Not a peaceful one. Not like now, where only the twins' laughter filled the air. No. This silence had been violent. A void. Ethan's body locked, his mouth opened, and before he could stop himself, his voice shattered the moment. "Brielle, stop, now." The words ripped from him like a wound. The hose dropped from Brielle's hand instantly, water still gushing, curling around her ankles. Her smile faltered, confusion flooding her expression. She spun around, eyes wide, lips parting to say something, but no words came. Only alarm, only the question, "What did I do wrong?" Liam blinked. Noah stopped laughing. The spray of water hissed against the plastic pool as the hose rolled. Ethan's breathing was erratic. He couldn't move. His fists were clenched. His jaw tightened so hard it felt like his teeth would snap. He hadn't meant to yell, hadn't even planned to come home today. But it was like his body had acted on its own. Like he wasn't there. Only the memory was. "Sir?" Brielle asked quietly, stepping forward with caution. He blinked, and suddenly, the present returned. The twins were safe. Alive. Giggling again, only softly now. Unsure if they were allowed. Brielle stood stunned, the hose finally limp at her feet. The sky above was pink with the fading sun. There was no scream. No silence. Only him and the past. He swallowed hard, turning his back to them, his hand raking through his hair. He didn't want them to see the wetness in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I didn't mean to. It's just the water." His voice cracked. He couldn't finish. There were no answers. Just echoes. Brielle stood frozen, her hand still hovering as if waiting for instructions. But Ethan gave none. Instead, he walked inside, his steps heavy, his soul heavier. As the sliding door clicked shut behind him, silence reclaimed the backyard once more. From inside, his voice came barely above a whisper. "Fear has a memory, and it never forgets." But why? Why did a simple spray of water unravel him so completely? The door clicked shut behind him with the precision of someone who had retreated here many times before. Ethan's study was immaculate, shadowed, a world sealed off from the rest of the Rowland estate. Floor to ceiling, bookshelves lined the walls like silent witnesses. Heavy drapes muffled the twilight. The only sound was the slow, suffocating breath of a man battling memory. He didn't sit at the desk. Instead, he walked to the far corner, where an antique bar cart stood untouched. His hand hovered over the glass decanter, then pulled back. He didn't need numbness. Not tonight. Tonight, he needed to feel it. Again, the memory returned with brutal ease. Years earlier, the house had been alive that night. A late summer gathering. Music loud, glasses clinking, voices echoing off high ceilings. Wealth and wine had mingled in celebration. Staff had moved discreetly through the rooms, making sure everything glowed just right. Ethan had been inside, laughing at something someone had said. He remembered that clearly because the next moment would be the last time he laughed without guilt. She had stepped outside alone. His wife. The twins were still infants then, fragile and new, like breath in glass. She held one of them, Noah, in her arms. Liam was sleeping upstairs. Why had she gone out there? Maybe for air, maybe to escape the noise. Maybe because that night had felt too loud for a heart already too full. The stone near the pool had always been slick. He'd meant to have it redone. He told himself that 100 times afterward. But that night, she slipped, her heel twisted, her body pitched forward. She hit her head hard on the edge. The sound, he never forgot it. A crack, followed by a splash. She screamed, just once, but the music inside was too loud. The laughter, too oblivious. No one heard. No one came. By the time someone finally wandered outside, it was too late. She was floating. Noah was crying beside her, soaked but alive. A miracle. That was what they called it. A miracle and a tragedy. Wrapped in the same breath. The report said it was an accident. Unavoidable. Quick. Clean. No one was blamed. But Ethan blamed everyone. Mostly, he blamed himself. If he had looked outside, if someone had been stationed by the doors, if the music had been lower, if the staff had heard, if anyone had cared just a little more, she would still be alive. From that night forward, water was no longer a symbol of joy or luxury. It was death. Cold, quiet, fast. It didn't knock. It didn't shout. It just waited, until no one was watching. He finally sat, collapsing into the leather armchair near the fireplace. His hands trembled as he pressed them together. His palms were clammy. He closed his eyes, and her scream echoed again. The splash, the silence, the baby's crying. He hadn't told anyone the full story, not even Brielle. Not the therapists, not the press. Only the silence knew. Outside, He could hear faint laughter again, his son's. Alive. Safe. He should be grateful. Instead, fear roared in his chest like a second heartbeat. Some grief doesn't fade. It hardens into fear. He whispered the words like a prayer. Or a confession. He couldn't tell anymore whether he was protecting his sons or reliving his wife's final moments. The grand chandelier in the main hall flickered slightly as the evening wind pressed against the tall windows. Ethan stood in the center of the marble floor, his jaw rigid, his breath shallow. The boys had been taken upstairs. Brielle stood at the base of the stairs, hands trembling but still held at her sides, like she was forcing herself to stay calm, stay respectful. "What were you thinking?" Ethan's voice cracked through the stillness. Brielle's lips parted, but he raised a hand. "No, don't. Don't talk yet. Just answer this. Why were my sons soaking wet, left alone in a pool?" "They weren't alone," she said gently. "I was right there, spraying them like animals," he snapped. "That's your idea of supervision." Brielle took a cautious step forward. "Sir, I didn't mean any harm. Their skin needs hydration. The doctor said short water exposure helps soothe the dryness and—" "Don't quote medical advice to me," Ethan cut in, voice rising. "You think splashing 2 toddlers is hydration? What if one of them slipped? What if one fell and hit his head like—" He stopped himself. The name. The memory. Too close. She saw it. "I was being careful," she said softly now. "Please believe me." They were laughing. They were happy. "Happiness doesn't keep children alive, Brielle," Ethan said bitterly. "Vigilance does. Responsibility does. And clearly, you are not capable of either." A heavy silence filled the room. Other staff stood frozen in doorways, unsure whether to leave or witness what came next. None spoke. Ethan's voice, his presence, had long since trained silence into obedience. No one dared question him, not even now, when the injustice hung thick in the air. "I would never hurt them," Brielle whispered. Ethan turned away for a second, as if looking at her made his skin crawl. "You already did." He moved to the side and motioned to the head of security who had appeared silently at the hall's edge, as if summoned by instinct. "Escort her off the property. Now." "No," Brielle said, her voice cracking as the words burst from her. "Wait, please. There's something you need to understand about the twins." "I've noticed," I said now. "Sir." She tried again, but the guard was already moving. She turned, her voice rising in panic. "Please. This isn't just about water. Their skin. It's reacting differently lately. I think something's wrong. Take her out." The guards flanked her, gently but firmly taking her arms. Brielle looked back over her shoulder, eyes wide, filled not with fear but with urgency. "I was trying to help. They need more than—" The door opened. The wind roared. From the top of the staircase came the sound that broke the last of the calm. Liam and Noah, screaming. Not tantrum cries, not tired wails, but a raw, primal shriek as if something deep in them understood that something precious was being torn away. Brielle looked up at them. Her face crumpled, but no tears fell. She was too shocked for tears. She had only tried to protect them. But the truth had never even been invited. When fear speaks loudly, truth rarely gets a turn. The doors closed behind her, and Ethan stood alone again, in the silence he had chosen over understanding. But something about the boy's screams lingered. Not just grief, but warning. What was Brielle desperately trying to tell him? The wind rustled through the cracked window pane of Brielle's small rental, carrying with it the scent of sea salt and distant bonfires. It was a modest space, bare walls, second-hand furniture, and a squeaky kitchen faucet that always dripped no matter how tightly it was shut. But it was quiet, too quiet. Brielle sat at the edge of her narrow bed, the fabric of her old uniform folded neatly on her lap. She hadn't thrown it away. Not yet. Not because she missed the job, but because she hadn't yet let go of the boys. She couldn't. Every hour since she'd been dismissed from Roland Estate played like a film reel behind her eyes. Liam's giggle as he slapped at the water. Noah's cautious curiosity when the hose first sprayed. The way their dry, inflamed skin had seemed to melt into calmness once the cool water touched them. She'd studied them closer than anyone. She had seen the red patches worsen under the heat of the California sun, the flare-ups, the itching, the tiny, desperate hands clawing at their arms and necks. It had started subtly, weeks earlier. Raised welts after playtime, crying fits at night, restless sleep. She had done her best to soothe them: lotions, cool cloths, soft cotton, but nothing worked like water. She didn't need a degree to see it. This wasn't normal dry skin. It was something more. Heat-triggered, chemical, reactive. She had gone to the estate nurse twice, then to the senior housekeeper, then directly to the estate manager. She had asked, pleaded for a medical re-evaluation, but each time, her concerns had been waved off. They're just sensitive babies. It's normal at this age. Don't exaggerate, Brielle. But she saw the signs. The skin didn't just redden, it inflamed. Raised blotches, feverish heat. One time, Noah's breathing had quickened. That was the night she stayed beside their crib until dawn, praying silently as she stroked his back with a cold cloth. She remembered whispering into the darkness, "Lord, help me see what others won't. Help me protect them, even if no one believes me." Every night since, she had prayed for the twins, not because it was her duty, but because it was her burden. A quiet fire in her spirit that told her, something is wrong. And now, she was gone. The very act that had calmed the boys, the water, was what had ended everything. Brielle stood and walked to the small table near the window, where a folded piece of paper sat. It was a letter she'd written days before she was fired, a final request for further testing. She'd never gotten a chance to submit it. Still unsigned, still unseen. She stared at it, the words swimming. What more could she have done? God sometimes places the warning in the hands no one listens to. She whispered the words aloud, voice steady despite the ache in her throat. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting amber shadows across the floor. The town of Seaside hummed quietly, families eating dinner, children playing by the shore. But in a mansion miles away, 2 children now lived without the only person who had ever truly understood what their bodies were silently crying out for. What happens now? Now that the only person who understood their pain is gone. The hallway was too white, too quiet, too cold. Ethan sat outside the pediatric emergency unit, hands limp between his knees, a damp hospital wristband still clinging to his arm. His suit jacket had been tossed aside hours ago, and his tie hung twisted around his collar like a noose. It had started that morning. Noah had been sluggish during breakfast, pale, a little warm. Then suddenly he collapsed, his body jerking, his breathing shallow. By the time the ambulance arrived, hives had exploded across his arms and neck. The paramedics had tried to cool him down en route, misting his skin, placing damp cloths along his limbs. "His system's in overdrive," one of them had said. "Get him cool." Now, Ethan hadn't even had time to process when, 2 hours later, Liam followed. Same symptoms, same terror. Now, both boys lay in adjacent rooms under constant monitoring. Tubes, wires, cooling pads lining their beds, IV fluids dripping, machines beeping at uneven rhythms. A doctor appeared, chart in hand, his face worn but calm. "Mr. Rowland," he said, "we believe your sons have a rare inflammatory sensitivity. It's heat-reactive, triggered by external temperatures, and compounded by skin trauma. If not treated, it escalates quickly." Ethan stood. "What does that mean?" "It means their immune systems respond aggressively to heat. When they sweat or overheat, their skin flares, and toxins build rapidly. In Noah's case, it reached a critical point. Immediate cooling slows the reaction. That's the most effective short-term response." Ethan's breath caught. Immediate cooling. Water, the hose, the spray, their laughter, the moment he destroyed. And then, Brielle. He remembered her face as they dragged her away. The way she had shouted his sons' names, not in defense of herself but in warning. He hadn't heard it then. Or maybe he had, and just didn't listen, because fear had spoken louder. And now, His boys were fighting for their lives. He dropped into the chair again, his chest hollow. This wasn't just about skin. This wasn't about discipline, or control, or propriety. This was about listening. He hadn't listened. Not to her. Not to the signs. Not to God. For years, his grief had been a wall solid, high, unmoving. He had buried his faith behind it, too afraid to feel, too proud to kneel. But tonight, in the sterile hush of a hospital hallway, with two sons behind glass and one truth rising like a wave inside him, he did something he hadn't done since the night his wife died. He bowed his head, his fingers laced, and he prayed, "God, I don't even know what to ask. I was wrong. Please, help them. Help me find a way to fix this." His voice cracked, his pride cracked with it. God did not remove the consequence, but he stopped the disaster. The boys would live. The doctors had confirmed that much. But Ethan knew this wasn't over, because the one person who had seen the danger, who had known the signs, who had tried to speak truth through the noise of his fear was gone, and she hadn't left a forwarding address. Can Ethan find Brielle before the damage becomes permanent? The air was sharp with night wind, and the street lamps flickered weakly above the transit station. Diesel fumes drifted in from the nearby bus lot. Everything about the place smelled like movement, like leaving. Ethan stood still. He had asked around for hours, driven up and down the shoreline, called contacts, checked every motel within a 10-mile radius. It was the nurse at the pediatric unit who had quietly slipped him a lead. She said she was headed south. She mentioned the 3 a.m. route out of Seaside. So here he was. At 2:43 a.m., the station was mostly empty. A vending machine hummed. A teenager with headphones leaned against a bench. And then he saw her. Brielle sat near the end of the loading platform, her coat buttoned to her neck, a small duffel bag at her feet. Her hands were folded in her lap, unmoving. Ethan hesitated. What right did he have? He took a step forward anyway. Then another. She looked up before he reached her. Her expression didn't change, no surprise, no smile. Just quiet recognition. And something else. Hurt. He stopped a few feet away. Brielle. She didn't respond. Her eyes held his, steady and unreadable. "I don't know how to start this," he said. The silence stretched. "I was wrong," Ethan finally said. "It wasn't my position. It wasn't policy. It was fear. That's what made the decision." Brielle blinked slowly. "Fear doesn't scream at people who are trying to help." He swallowed hard. "I know." He moved to sit beside her, but she shifted slightly, just enough for him to notice. "I let my past control my present," he admitted. "I saw water and thought of death. I didn't see my sons healing. I saw my wife drowning. I saw myself failing again." For a moment, Brielle looked away toward the empty road stretching beyond the platform. "I begged them to test the twins again," she whispered. "I wrote letters. I documented the patterns." She trailed off, voice tight. Ethan nodded, ashamed. "The doctors confirmed it. You were right." She finally looked at him again, her gaze softening, but not forgiving. "Not yet. I didn't come to ask you to come back for me," he said. "I know I don't deserve that. But they need you." "I know," she said quietly. "I'll make things right. However you need." Brielle was silent again. Then she stood. Slowly. Picked up her bag. "I'm not returning for you," she said. "I'm returning for Liam and Noah." Ethan nodded. "That's more than fair." They rode back in silence. When they stepped through the doors of the estate, the sound of soft crying filtered from upstairs. The nurse on shift looked up, surprised. "They've been unsettled. Haven't stopped since." Before she could finish, Brielle was already moving. The moment the twins saw her, the sobbing stopped. Arms outstretched. Two tiny voices gasped her name between hiccuped tears. She knelt on the floor as they wrapped around her, their heads pressing to her shoulder, their bodies finally at peace. Ethan watched from the doorway, emotion flooding his throat. "Grace does not wait for us to deserve it." He whispered it to himself, unsure if it was a truth or a miracle. But as he looked at Brielle holding his sons, the woman he had judged, dismissed, silenced, he asked himself the question now echoing in his mind. Can he ever truly separate the past from the present? The room smelled of antiseptic and lavender lotion, one applied by the nurses, the other by Brielle. She had brought it from home. A familiar scent to calm the twins during their recovery. Small details like that were her language of love. Ethan sat quietly in the corner, a legal pad on his lap, untouched. His pen rested between his fingers, but he hadn't written a word in over an hour. His focus was on the two small beds in front of him, Liam and Noah, each asleep beneath soft cotton blankets. Their breathing even. Their skin no longer red and inflamed, but beginning to heal. Each day brought more stability, less crying, longer naps, smiles, and it was because of her. Brielle had stepped in not with fury, but with focus. Every morning, she arrived early, clipboard in hand, consulting with the hospital team, noting medication times, skin temperature changes, and hydration levels. She spoke with clarity, but without ego. She wasn't seeking praise, she was seeking results. Ethan watched it all unfold and didn't interrupt, didn't assert himself. He was learning, slowly, what true leadership looked like when the mission was about healing, not control. One afternoon, he stepped in front of the cameras himself. A press conference had been arranged without his approval, spurred by whispers from investors and publicists about the twins' hospital stay and the sudden reappearance of their former maid. He had been advised to say nothing. He said everything. I was wrong, he told the cameras, the microphones, the flashing lights. I fired someone who was trying to save my sons. I let fear cloud my judgment, and pride silence the truth. If there's a price to pay, I'll pay it. And he did. The backlash wasn't loud, it was silent. Swift. Surgical. Within days, 2 major investors pulled out of his most lucrative tech venture. One long-term contract quietly dissolved. Rumors circulated of instability. Doubts about his mental clarity surfaced in boardrooms where he was once untouchable. He received calls, cold conversations, paperwork with firm language. His empire began to shrink. Quietly, rapidly, but he didn't fight it. For the first time, he accepted a loss without grasping to salvage it. Because what had been salvaged in that hospital room mattered more. He sat beside Brielle one morning, both watching as Noah tried to hum a tune through his sippy cup while Liam giggled. They're getting better, Ethan said quietly. Yes, she replied, not turning. I don't know how to say thank you in a way that means enough. You don't have to, she said. Just see them. That's all I ever asked. He nodded. The machines beeped steadily. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. A nurse walked by, smiled, and moved on. There were no shareholders here, no press, no empire. Just 2 boys, 2 adults, and a grace that had made room for healing at a cost. Sometimes, God saves the child and breaks the idol. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. He had built a world to protect his pain, a tower of power, control, and silence. But when the winds blew, it wasn't the tower that was spared. It was the children, and the woman who had never stopped seeing what he couldn't. This was the turn. Not loud, not triumphant, just real. And it was enough. The glass doors of the therapy center opened automatically as Ethan stepped inside, holding Liam's hand, while Noah skipped ahead toward the familiar playroom. The walls were painted with calming blues and soft, abstract waves. Shelves overflowed with books, puzzles, and therapy tools. It wasn't a place of shame. It had become a place of growth. Each week, the twins met with their counselor, learning how to name emotions, how to breathe through discomfort, how to express what their little bodies still remembered but couldn't yet explain. Brielle always came along. She was still with them, not as a nanny now, but something deeper. A permanent figure. A safe voice. Ethan sat in the waiting area, watching as Noah pointed to a drawing on the wall. That one's me, he said proudly to Brielle. She smiled. And who's that next to you? He pointed again. You. Ethan looked down at his hands. They no longer bore the weight of empire. There were no meetings to rush to, no mergers, no earnings reports. The business hadn't completely vanished, but it was smaller now, purposeful, intentional. He lived simply for the first time in decades. He cooked when he could, picked the boys up from their sessions, sat on the floor during story time. And at night, after they were asleep and the house settled into silence, he often stepped outside back to the place where it all began. The same tiles still edged the pool. The same lights glowed softly from beneath the water. But the fear had shifted. He sat on a bench he had placed beside the pool, a safe distance away. Not to avoid the water, but to finally see it clearly. Some nights, he stared into it for hours. Years ago, the silence of this yard had betrayed him. It had swallowed a scream and taken someone he loved. But now, the silence was different. Now, it was a pause between laughter. Earlier that evening, the boys had splashed along the shallow end under Brielle's watchful eye. They wore sun-safe suits and laughed with the wild abandon only children can afford. They called out to him, "Daddy, watch this." And he had watched, not through a lens of panic, but with faith, not in perfection, but in presence. As the night deepened and the crickets began their song, Ethan leaned back, his eyes drifting upward to the stars. He could still hear faint giggles from the twins' room upstairs. Brielle had tucked them in an hour ago. The house was quieter now, quieter, but safer. He closed his eyes. He could still remember the scream. He always would, but it didn't define the silence anymore. Now, that silence held something new, something sacred, laughter, hope, redemption. He lost everything he worshipped and kept everything that truly mattered. Ethan didn't move. He didn't need to. He had spent so long building walls to protect his heart, his home, his name. But in the end, it wasn't his strength that saved his sons. It was surrender. The man who had chosen fear had finally chosen faith, and the silence at last was full of life.